You want to try to cut music where it sounds as if a composer composed it. You're thinking like a composer. You're dealing with pitches and phrases in a certain compositional way. And I know that many of you are probably not composers, but kind of try to imagine that approach. Steven Saltzman, and I'm currently a music editor with a history of composing for music for film and television. That's how I came to LA. But transitioned into music editorial about almost 20 years ago. A music editor has a really multifaceted job if you look at the whole picture of their responsibilities. Working with a composer and bringing their music to the final dub or the final mix is one aspect of their responsibilities. Often a composer might need a communicator between the director and themselves. A music editor can sometimes help bridge the gap in communication, maybe talk in musical terms to the composer, talk in filmatic terms to the director. Very often we're in touch a bit, not necessarily too much, but we'll be in the loop with the composer and the composer's music mixer, preparing the stems for the music for the dub. That person at the dub that will be mixing the music is often the dialogue and music mixer. There's usually one person, they handle dialogue and music, and so we're in touch with them about track count, limitations of the studio, or what they might need. Sometimes the score will be composed to a certain scene, and maybe they've changed the movie or the scene, or they've edited or shortened it or lengthened it or moved it to a different place. Therefore, the music now no longer fits in its original position that it was created or intended. The music editor can go in and help edit the music, move things around, modify things with tremendous respect for the composer's creativity and for respect for the composer's original intention for the scene. So we take all that into account with the utmost respect and prepare it properly again for the dub. Most composers that are in this field understand that process and kind of hand over their music and give over their music, knowing that this kind of thing can happen. And then this is where the relationship between composer and music editor is so important, that there's a significant element of trust. Something interesting happened here, and it was just the way it was placed. Notice that the piano element right here, that little piano part, and also over here. And again, he's got a piano melody. It kind of fits where the dialogue is. So here's our dialogue elements. Notice that it has its first modulation, or its note attack, if you will, in between dialogue.
What do I do? Yes, protocol. Some guess this time.
So this little dialogue is right in this little hole here where the music is kind of just thumping along and there's no particular melody starting. But here the melody starts and it's just a little bit, a beat or two before he talks again. So once you have a melody that starts or ends, once you start it, like over here, right in here before the dialogue starts, it establishes itself as a musical element, something to attach the ear to, and it can play through the next dialogue line. So it's kind of like once you've brought the musical interest to the audience attention, you can then let it play. You may want to bring it down a little bit as they talk, but then the dialogue comes in and becomes most important, and it's okay to keep that musical element going. Some of the more filmatic or technical things that I look for as I'm digging into maybe a scene or two are camera movement, which is really important to help the music support the story or support the emotion that's happening. One specific thing is camera push-ins or pullbacks, sometimes panning, particularly pushing in as it's an emotional. The closer you get, particularly to a character or a scene, it's speaking to the emotion. Something is happening here. There's a reason why the camera is moving, right? So this is a moment where I look to place a certain musical element or a phrase or a melody or something characteristic to that piece or those pieces I've chosen to speak to that. It's actually really important where you start and stop. What I find is very often I'll start music in between a dialogue phrase, if there's dialogue going on, or maybe they're done with a dialogue, or maybe it's going into a montage. A lot of different scenarios for this. But you rarely want to actually start or have a musical sound start when somebody's talking. So you want to try to avoid that. However, it doesn't mean that you want to avoid music when there's dialogue. This is one of the things that music should be able to work around or weave around dialogue or what's being said, and can actually speak to the drama or the emotion, or be actually, you can go contrapuntal or against what is being said with the music. So there's all different ways to play that. I very often move a piece 1 frame, 2 frames, 3 frames back, retard, advance. Even a couple frames can make a difference. I took the beginning of the piece and pasted in a transition point here to emphasize that point after the explosion.
What the hell?
Now, it could be moved around. You could look at this a little more closely, maybe to come closer to the explosion. But what this does is it kind of has a bit of a change here. And sometimes you can just grab a piece, throw it in the timeline, and play it. And you might find that things happen kind of magically, or what I say, serendipitously. So what I would do is just listen and see what parts of this music might or might not work for any particular section in the clip or the area of the film. And just let it play. Because the point is, with this kind of thing of just throwing something in there, you might be surprised. You might find something that you didn't think about. Another thing that we often deal with in music editing is source music. And I kind of took a stab at this just to play some ideas for this scene right here, where it seems like, you know, it cuts to where they're having dinner and a conversation. So the idea, the concept is, well, they're in their hab, and you know, one of them has a little, you know, way to play some music while they're eating dinner. So I don't know. This could be a whole, you know, character-driven, like what kind of music do they like to listen to, you know, kind of like Gravity, you know, he liked the country music. Kind of quiet, but literally it's mixed with low level. And I've got an EQ on it, just kind of very narrow bandwidth EQ to make it sound like it might be coming out of a inexpensive, you know, little play box or something. And then without spending too much more time on this, there was this other mid scene that I was experimenting with. And this is kind of interesting in that the placement of the start was interesting. This might be the next time they go back outside. Notice that you know, so this is kind of interesting. It has a rhythmic element to it.
Last looks.
And then when he looks at his, you've got these kind of, you know, modulated tabla sound on his, what he discovers, that unique thing that he discovers. So the idea might be, well, that's kind of nice. That kind of sound IDs that he's focused on that. So that kind of is a shaping element to the arc of the piece. When he looks at the piece again from his bag right in here, I was thinking, well, it might be nice to kind of bring that sound element back again, and this would be kind of like a layering, a very simple kind of layering effect with the blue track right here. This little piece is essentially is kind of that little part, and let's see if I can get it to kind of merge with the main track, which is orange, and see if we like that idea. So it's kind of nice. We want to try to use in temp editing actually the endings of a recording. In other words, how the composer, for whatever piece it is, how they actually ended their piece, to try to utilize that for our ending that we're going to edit. And this involves obviously editing and pasting and cutting and pasting it together. So the endings are also very important because that can also bring attention to what's happening, dialogue-wise or cut-wise. Very often, it's kind of nice to end a piece after the cut of the scene or the shape or the emotional arc of our initial area that we're putting the music to. So let that music kind of tape or glue over or smooth over a cut transition, or it could be a dissolve or anything, into a new place that we're going to go where the music will end. So sometimes music, the endings can help kind of smooth over and match the film editing process in that time. So those are some basic things, really key things that I look for in editing music. Try not to do something like this. So don't just put if you don't have to, put a crossfade or a fade out. You know, again, it sounds kind of okay, but I find that it's much better to actually use the ending of the piece to try to emphasize something. Not always, but sometimes. Let's look at the ending of this one to see if we like that. You know, and that could be flexible. It could be, you know, moved around a little bit, but I kind of like that. Sometimes you find music that's placed in a scene that is more like trying to be part of the drama, or trying really hard to be there. And what can happen very often is in placing music in a scene where it seems to be trying too hard, the tendency is to keep pulling down the volume. Pull it down a little more. It's just intrusive. Pull it down more, more, more. And then by the time you get it so low that it almost disappears, to me, that's an indication that it's not the right music for that scene. It's not cut right, or the scene doesn't need music at all. So very often, this kind of thing can be part of telling the story, that maybe music shouldn't be in that scene. Let the actors act, let them tell the story. So sometimes it's not always about music. LA Post Fest, create your story in post.